Hello, my wonderful engineers, or these days computer scientists. Today we're going to be learning how to add animation to our sprites. Animation just means that essentially our sprite is made up of a still two-dimensional image. But our sprite has costumes that contain multiple of these still two-dimensional images. And actually, I'm going to grab the walking bear sprite from Animals because I think he has one of the better things to show you guys for this. And our sprites are made up of these 2D images, and they have costumes that can contain a bunch of different 2D images. And we could using our code, we could set our bear to constantly switch between its next costume. So I'm just going to run this by clicking on it. You can run code by clicking on it. That's not a good way to do it. I'm just doing it for this example. But if we look at this bear, if I switch his costume fast enough, even though we know that these are a bunch of 2D images that are still and not moving, we can make it look like a walking bear. Something to keep in mind is that if we look at this bear animation, it's very fluid. He really walks. Whereas if we look at this scratch cat animation, so now I'm going to add a little animation to scratch cat. He just kind of twitches back and forth. The more costumes you have, the more animation frames you have. A frame is one of these individual pictures. The more frames you have, the more fluid his motion will be. And people who play a lot of video games might be recognize that because their video games will have much better animations. Everything will look a lot nicer. It'll look less jumpy if you're at a higher frame rate, if you have more frames. And that's a very similar concept to what we're showing here. But we want this bear to be animated in our project without me having to go into the code and obviously click on next costume every time. So during class, I proposed the question, what's the first thing we need? What's the very first thing we need so that someone doesn't have to, so that the user can make the bear switch costumes? So that someone playing this project, interacting with this, can do it because they can't go into the code and run this code manually. And the first thing we need for all of our code is an event. We always need to tell the sprite, we always need to tell the project when this code should be run. So I'm going to make it so that this code is run when the left arrow key is pressed. No, let's do the right arrow key. When the right arrow key is pressed, he'll go to his next costume. Sure. So right arrow key, he's going to his next costume. That seems to work pretty well. I don't want my user to have to sit here and flip through the animation like a flip book. I don't want them to have to push a button every time he takes a step. I want the bear to just take steps naturally. So I asked the students, how can we, so we have him switch one costume every time we push a button. How could we have him switch multiple costumes? And the intuitive thing, the obvious thing is maybe just have him, add another block of code that sets him to do his next costume and his next costume and his next costume. So now instead of switching costumes once, he'll switch costumes 4 times. So that sounds like it would give us a better animation. But let's try it. Let's click. I'm going to hit the right arrow key. Actually, I'm going to switch this to the green flag for now, just so you guys can see exactly when I'm running the code. But when I click the green flag, it still only looked like it's doing one costume to me. That's strange. I have 4 pieces of code to tell it to switch costumes, but it still looks like it's only changing once every time I run this code. And the reason it looks like that is not because it's only running one next costume. All of this code is still being run, but it's just happening so fast that essentially, and this is a little bit of a dumbed down version of what's happening, essentially what's happening is that the bear is changing costumes so quickly that we can't see it. So the bear does switch to his next costume 4 times, so he does take 4 steps, but we only see the costume he ends on because each of these costume changes, he's doing in 0 seconds, instantly. Done, 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 done. So what we need is some way to control our bear so that he doesn't go through his costume so quickly, so that we have time to see what costume he's wearing. And the way we do that is with control blocks are going to help us, and one control block specifically. This is a new block, and it's called wait 1 seconds. It's at the top of these orange blocks that say control. And by the way, this next costume, it's also new. It's in the middle of the purple blocks. But we need a wait. So we can make it so that after he puts a costume on, he waits 1 second, and then we'll get to see his next costume. And then he'll wait 1 second, and then he'll put on his next costume. He'll wait 1 second, and then he'll put on his next costume. So now when we press play, we could see our bear taking steps. So that looked a little bit better, but it's a little slow. When we have our animations, we don't want them to play so slowly because this still looks like it's not like fluid. It doesn't look like he's walking. It looks like he's still like, like kind of teleporting around. It's not fluid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 0.1 seconds, 1/10 of a second, decimal point 1 seconds. I'm actually going to make him do this a few more times. And this is not a good way to do this, and we'll show you a better way in a second. But now he switches his costume. He waits a very small amount of time. He goes to his next costume, waits a very small amount of time, and then he switches his costume. So let's see what that looks like. That bear is definitely walking now. Looks good. But I have a problem. This bear is stopping his walk animation after just like a second or 2 seconds. I want this bear to maybe continue this walking animation for a very long time, but I don't want to manage that by copying huge amounts of code. So what we want is we only need one of these steps. We only need one of them. So we can delete all this. And what we want to do is we can use a loop to make him repeat the same action over and over again. This is the last new kind of code block we're going to look at today. And we have two kinds. We have the repeat loop and the forever loop. The forever loop is just what it sounds like. Any code inside of this, it's going to run the code from top to bottom. But then when it gets to the bottom of the loop, it's going to go back up to the top of the loop and then start running from top to bottom. So it's going to keep going through this in a circle, which is why it's called a loop. It's going to loop through this code forever. So let's see what that looks like. So it's just repeating the same step just like I was doing before, but instead of having me to copy and paste all of the times it's going to repeat, it's just going to keep doing it forever and ever and ever. Another version of this, maybe you don't want it to go on forever. Maybe you want to push a button and have him take like 10 steps. You could use the repeat and then a number. So this number is going to be the number of times he changes his costume. So I think he takes like 1, 2, 3. It's like 4 costumes to take one step. So maybe if I do 40, if I repeat 40 times, he'll take 10 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Looks good. And that's animation. That is the gist of it. That is ultimately what we want, is we want our characters to be able to move fluidly. Maybe you could spice it up a little. Instead of just making it so it plays an animation, you can make it so that when I press the right arrow key, he, changed his costume, and maybe each time he changes his costume, he moves a step. So now when I hit play, when I hit right arrow key, I'm sorry, maybe he'll actually start walking forward, and maybe he should make 2 steps. And 1 step, by the way, is a very small amount. Maybe he should take 5 steps, might be good. Yeah, that looks reasonable. So when right arrow key is pressed, he'll take 5 steps each time he changes his costume. So now we actually have our animation and he's moving with it. You guys don't have to do that. What's due today is just to give me a nice animated sprite. But if you look at other students' works, I have students who are already making full video games with this technique. I have students who are making Naruto's, doing giant Rasengans and like having an animation where they use a Rasengan and destroy like a dinosaur. I have all sorts of things. I'll show you those in class. Maybe I'll have a studio linked that you can see these from, but I do have to end this. I'll see you all next time, and be sure to email me and ask any questions if you need any help with this. Thank you very much, and I will see you next time.